Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Angel Wallace Productions and God's Grace on Thee. Today is Monday. It is April Fool's Day, and boy, they sure fooled us, didn't they? We actually had 13 months in a year, and of course, you know how sadistic these demonic people are. They want to alter everything in our life. So, basically, they are mocking us. But anyway, today is the 1st of April. It is 9:45 a.m. here in Reno, Nevada. And I don't even know the temperature, but I'll tell you what, the sun's out and it's so gorgeous. It's 37 degrees. Okay, so today I want to delve right into chapter 6 of the Sananda Journals. And it begins Tuesday, September 5th, 1989, 6:45 a.m., year 3, day 20. ASHTAR present and ready to resume. Thank you. You should be acquainted with my energy field dharma to the extent you will recognize me anywhere. Work at that, Chela, for there will be times, little one, that we have not time for more than the pronouncement of a thought pattern. Control is in the hands of evil. You ones do not wish to have more on evil or good or no, until you recognize, and we see you blunder constantly. You will not be given further advancement. I do not talk of discernment and judgment. I speak of your very ability to stay physically alive. Unfortunately, your world now runs on evil. Evil power, control, public enslavement to their whims. And there's many, many ways to produce slavery, friends. You want free energy? When do we just get on with free energy? You have free energy. You have the secrets. Why do you think you are in such trouble? The slaves don't have the free energy of primitive format that the enslavers hold. But nonetheless, it is around for the use of the big boys. Open your eyes. Well, what about the drug wars in Colombia? What about them, I ask you? You have had days to ponder that since Hatton gave you 2 journals on the subject of control. Stop and ponder a moment. Why do you think? Yes, of course, the drug lords are overstepping their bounds. Further, there's much money at stake that it must be confined lest the drug half of the cartels bury the simple money cartel. It is all a gigantic effort to bring the mavericks under control. And why do you think a major drug lord would give the world petition to the United States to stop using his product? Why do you think the United States has moved in military equipment? Of course, we knew that you knew. Bargain with one big lord against another, work out business contracts, and snuff out the opposition. Go home, tell the people all is well. Drug war under surrender and other lies of top echelon stupidity. And the public eats it up like candy. Meanwhile, you've had the major distraction while all else nasty goes on. And you have now worked out the most favorable of all arrangements for the open production of qualified drugs. Oh, it will be hidden in the disguise of subsidies to the farmers, etc. Do not raise drug-producing plants or let them grow the government will purchase and destroy. The latter's the way it will go anyway. I do mean your government, however, not Colombia's or another's. And you will pay for it to be handled most legally. You see, you have to bring the top-level crime heads in on the plan under offer to rid them of competition. They just take on a bigger, nastier partner with no competition. Now make a big example and splash in the press, and life goes on in a stepped-up manner. And the bankers, and thus your puppet governors, can go right on in the comfort and realization that the funds will funnel right back into the banks and be labeled in purity. And then they have made one more coup against you, ever digging out of your mess. the next fraud. Further, they are getting ready to project the following type of fraud upon you. They will finally come out with, to get the AIDS and drug problems under control, Mr. America, we will control these drugs we are paying for and take dealers off the streets. We will become the dealers. Give drugs out in measured amounts for a great cost reduction, or free to those who really want to clean up their act. Give the users new and separate needles, contaminated with selected contaminants such as the AIDS virus. Set up a rehab program whereby the rehabees are wiped away, one way or another. Then you will announce that it didn't work, but look how hard we tried and see how much your money we spent on it. The new drug kingpin in Washington will be denounced. He would be prepared for that, denounced but far richer for the experience. And you are farther in the pits. Oh, it will just sort of die like everything else in the press. Urgh. And whatever happened to old, what's his name, I wonder. It will not die, however, until they have all your public's defensive gear turned over and you cannot rise up against the real culprits. Crime will continue to sweep your lands like you cannot conceive, and you will have a new and controlled total chaos. For now, you will have just ensured that crime will run rampant, and there will be less money available. You will be in a depression, a prearranged, and you will also be in handcuffs. You will have more addicts creating all types of crime to garner funds for their habits, and it will not be available. Oh yes, you have it all set up for the destruction of your world. Meanwhile, the masters go right on planning annihilation, yours, while they finish off their escape routes and safety havens. Further, meanwhile, all of you sit and look at the big hoopla and wonder, what in the world are they doing now? They perform their dismemberment of you ones right before your eyes, somehow deaden your senses and have you pleading for more. Take our money, take our guns, take our, control our. There should be a law, and yes, we will vote that one in. So be it. You are running on empty, beloved ones on earth, on the very dregs and fumes. The only way to fight it is to not fight it. Fit in. Allow yourselves a non-attention so that they think what they give to help you build your little old businesses, which they think they will garner anyway, in doing just that. You see, brothers, it doesn't matter in the end. The house of cards will fall. Then you are in real trouble. And at some point along here, they overstep their cosmic bounds and the world comes down. Then we still have our base operators and basic installations begun. And of course, you all live happily ever after. A perceived eternity, however, after. Oh, you thought ASHTAR got off the old subject of evil. Oh no, he didn't. The above is the ultimate in evil. Now, as to free energy, do you not think that by the time the big evil players get through dumping the ones like Pons Fleischmann, discounting Nikola Tesla again, that there will be quite a few brethren looking for a home and a quiet laboratory, sans news press entertainment, to do their work? They didn't understand about security. They only understood being the first ones there with their names in the media and do all this good for the masses. I request herein that every copy in the hands of any of you of your emblem newsletter be copied and given into Dharma's hands. A lot of work has already been accomplished. Paul will have the resource stashed. Thank you. You have been advanced a grade. Yes, brothers, you have felt a change or an integration of command. It is not exactly like that. It is that you are far enough along in your training and in the world situation that I'm going to be predominantly stationed within your sector vortex, actually. I honor and salute all of you ones in both this realm and yours for a job superbly well done. I am no greater than any other who has spoken with you or given instruction. It is that my duty has kept me elsewhere through your training, and I serve as, what you would say, the Master Jesus Sananda's commandment. Now a nasty poke at Dharma. I actually witnessed her watching an evangelical program last night where he asked those in the audience, "Do you really know Jesus? Do you even know if you know Jesus? Does he light up your heart so that you have a pounding constantly of his presence? And if you aren't sure, raise up your hand. Little turkey, raise your hand. 25 wet noodles blast to you, Dharma. And if all you do is stay on your knees, the world can never get up off its knees." I think I will embolden that. If all you do is stay on your knees, the world can never get up off its knees. So be it. And Selah. Amen. Aho. And just because that one laid a heavy trip on you about Simon Peter, get off it, Dharma. As a matter of fact, Peter did not deny Christ Jesus Emmanuel. He was terrified for his own life substance. There's a major difference. And every time a so-called church argues over doctrine of man, input, it is an entire group. It's denying Christ. And brothers, it is more than any 3 times in one day. And Paul did not intentionally deny Christ or relay nasty lies on purpose. Do you not see if it had to be thusly done? And now you must come into the acceptance of angels from heavens, which we most surely are, my dear friends. How dark brothers work. Oh, dear ones, even the above paragraph shows how subtle your dark brothers really are. How better to shut down Dharma than to allow her to believe that perhaps she does not really believe. If truth can be stopped before it breathes in the light of day, darkness is ensured. So let us work for us stillborn. The dark ones will cry, "No, little sparrow, you will write and write and write until it is finished." You are all simply unaware of traps which the dark forces lay for the unwary constantly, at every moment of your existence, every moment. The temptations of the dark brothers, as they are called, can be so very subtle, so subtle that even those on the path will never realize it, and they'll be led away from their task, led astray, or certainly weakened in their resolve. And I'm going to lay out in plain language the means by which the forces of darkness attempt to draw human souls into the downward spiral. And I insist you read it carefully along with all the information projected by other entities in this document. You must know your enemy. In short, you must know the powers that oppose man's spiritual progress, for the forces will always strike through your humanness. Do not be mistaken into believing the dark brotherhood just hang out around waiting to gain your soul and to toss you off into a perceived hell. Nay, they are not that stupid. Rather, they, you might say, act as testing agents for the race of man, forces whose task it is to weed out from among the human flock those who are not developed enough to allow them to move forward into the higher ground of spiritual achievement. Now, don't go forth and misunderstand this statement, for I am not finished. Read on, please. There are too many of you who half read, half project, misinterpret, usually for others also, and glance at a thing and then toss it aside as not for me, or ill-written, or any number of other cop-out excuses. It is for you. And the Dark Brotherhood brothers, how about DBBs? Know that many souls would not be taken in by their seductions, that many individuals can perceive clearly whenever attempts are made to draw them away from the light. But they also know that multitudes of incarnate individuals on earth plane have allowed the attractions of pleasure and materialism, addictions, and tunnel vision to sway them. They know that worry, self-pity, hatred, resentment, grief, and judgment cause every living entity with the ability to reason to be clouded in perception. And they further know that even the most devout worker will have self-doubts and therefore must be attacked in like manner. So the victim does not note the attack. Usually the DBBs won't waste time on the firm believers who remain firm in truth. But for ones who can do them in, you are under constant fusillade. I mean constant, even in your sleep, if you do not call for your protection in your absence of control of self. Now the real origin of the species, here I will lose some. But it is to be stated at any rate. Truth is not what you want to hear. Truth is. And let me speak of the origin of these entities we will call the DBBs. Remember, the early phase of the human race is far different from that which is believed by scientists and evangelists. You did not evolve upwardly from unicellular creatures which appeared in the primeval swamps or slowly cooling earth some millions of years ago. Now, some life forms were allowed to develop through natural selection, but evolution processes, as outlined by Darwin and others, are extremely limited. Mr. Darwin would be the first to tell you so. Pay attention. Almost all the life forms that evolved through natural selection from unicellular creatures are now extinct. And those that have continued to the present are mainly of the lizard variety, all being cold-blooded creatures of relatively simple metabolism and with no prospect of ever evolving into forms capable of emotional or mental experiences of man. Now, warm-blooded life forms on your planet were seeded onto the surface of the planet and originate in other parts of the galaxy or cosmos. And often specimens were deliberately brought to Earth in vehicles and left to procreate on their own. This was the case for most of the early root races of man, although in at least one case a root race was developed on Earth itself by genetic engineers who were from another star system, using certain techniques now recognized by man and called cloning. Sound familiar? It is necessary to know truth of origin of man to fully understand the subject matter. And you must know that man has been the recipient of many additions and inputs from other levels and other parts of this galaxy. The acquisition of the soul, a most significant addition to humanity, occurred hundreds of thousands of years ago when entities from a higher plane, an astral one, came to Earth, took on physical forms, and proceeded to interbreed with mankind as he was at that time. Now, please do not confuse with ethereal as it pertains to himself. As a result of this miscegenation between the groups, a number of mutations occurred in the offspring, as will always occur with crossbreeding of species, and sometimes giving rise to creatures which would be looked upon now as quite fantastic. And among the mutations was one change which had extremely profound consequences for the human race. And this was basically the acquisition of the soul. Further, until the addition of this interesting phenomenon, the human grouping did not express or experience death. This too will seem quite without credibility to many readers hereof. However, it may help to understand that mankind then did not have the same dense corporeality as the animals did and still do. It was not necessary to go through an aging process similar to that which man now knows, because the bodies were capable of deriving from ambience instead of all the necessary energies to sustain life indefinitely. Now, this was aided at the time by the presence of an inert gas known as xenon in the atmosphere of all the Earth at that time. Now this amounted to some 3% of the total. And the rejuvenation of all bodies was also made possible by the fact that the human race was not then subject to the many negative emotional states which are now common. And unknown to man were self-interest and or pity, hatred, greed, anger, remorse. They simply were unknown emotions. The damage done to bodies in this present time is incalculable. Now, man now sets about his own demise through these very emotional aspects. Humanity has blinded itself to the truth of this fact. Most ones thinks it is right to bear resentments against others that they believe have harmed them, that they need to hate one who hates them, and that they have very justification to feel sorry for themselves or to worry excessively or to grieve under many circumstances, never realizing that not a single positive effect can ever flow from such negative emotional states. And none of these emotions does a thing to the enemy. They only bring back and wreak debilitation upon the projector. All dark emotions only bring harm to the one harboring them, and none produce any positive results whatsoever. An equality sought by all entities through the experience of incarnation on the physical plane is the ability to exist apart from any need for a body. And this ability was not possessed by individual human beings at the epoch in discussion. It was a characteristic of the human family as a whole, but not of the individual fragments into which the human life stream had divided itself. Now, in order to allow the individual fragments to acquire this quality of permanence without a physical body, there had first to be an experience of the body itself. And by living for an extended period in a physical body, the individual fragments of the human life stream would learn to gather their essence, their uniqueness around the body itself. In a sense, to reify their individual essence with reference to the physical body. It was intended that the human life stream, which prior to its appearance on the earth as man was far more amalgamated, far more homogeneous, and blended together than it is currently, should learn through this initial phase to differentiate itself into separate but coherent individuals. And up until the time of crossbreeding, the process had not been completed. If the different fragments of the human life stream had given up their physical bodies simultaneously, they would not have acquired the necessary self-picture or self-realization to enable them to remain apart from one another. Let us compare to a cup of water tossed into the air. Now the water would disperse and come down as a spray, separate droplets. However, if the water is tossed up frozen and returned, then it would return in the original grouping of droplets. Worse, man can be even more defined by the freezing concept. In an analogous sense, the first effect of the freezing of individual human fragments was to make them emotionally colder toward each other. The warmth of emotional affection and love would have promoted a melting of the now more rigid of selfness in each individual, and therefore this had to be avoided until a stronger cast of individuality could be molded. Eons passed, and the individuality of each fragment did become stronger. However, it is only within the last few thousands of years has it solidified to the point where it is no longer dangerous to allow true love and affection to flower between members of the human family. And this is why the major teaching of the most recent way showers included beloved Emmanuel, Jesus of Nazareth, has been that of love for all. So, how did the freezing of individual fragments occur? Well, it is a process which has been called the gift of the soul. Dharma, let us take a break, please, as this will require a couple of long sessions. Thank you. ASHTAR to standby. Salut. Out. Chapter 7. Recording 2. ASHTAR. Tuesday, September the 5th. 1989, 11:05 a.m., Year 3, Day 20. I am here also, Dharma. Let us move on, please. ASHTAR present to continue. On with the origin of man. Now, when the crossbreeding between Earth humans and other human groups produced offspring with a parent from each group, the offspring all had that one capability which humans at that time lacked. They had the facility of remaining focused and individualized without the aid of the physical body. This emanated from the entities which ensouled the offspring, not being a part of human life stream as such, but rather were beings from another star system that had asked for and had received permission to incarnate on the earth through the mutant bodies that were then created. I do not understand why there is such reluctance to accept truth. Is it not that your continued effort is to again be a portion and one with God? So why is it so unacceptable to believe that God conceived you rather than molded you from a handful of mud? Could you not more easily grow from God's source than from dirt? Little ones of earth, you have such a long, long journey into knowledge. Reincarnation begins. So let me now explain a decision which was then made and undertaken as action by the guides of the human life stream. There would be allowed a speeding up of the individualizing process for human beings to bring them quickly to the point where they could exist apart and separate from their physical bodies. Now, one of the reasons was to allow the beginning of the reincarnational scheme in which human entities would live repeated lives in different bodies and would sojourn into the astral realms between earthly lives. However, until each human entity became capable of retaining a separate existence apart from the physical body without allowing itself to be drawn back and absorbed by the life stream as a whole, it was not possible to allow the death experience to begin. Then, of course, without death, rebirth into the physical level would not take place. Now, the reason for the death-rebirth pattern was related to the various effects which each astral group was having upon mankind, both during and after the interbreeding. I would certainly far rather I be grown from God than from one-celled fish or serpent or even an ape. For goodness sakes, what is the matter with you humans who do not use that wondrous brain gifted to you from all this God's plan? These entities were of many levels in terms of their understanding of the cosmic laws, and some of them were extremely base in vibration, motivated solely by selfish concerns. Now, these latter proceeded to teach to the more innocent human group many techniques relating to the manipulation of others, hypnotism, and selfish pursuits, so that the original purity of mankind rapidly became debased. Who had the best teachers and integrators of all experience? Lucifer's bands of hoodlums, improving the breed. Now, these latter ones proceeded in all haste to teach to the more innocent and ignorant the ways of satanic culmination. It was recognized by humanity's guides that the only way to short-circuit this downward spiral, which had been initiated by the astral group, was to cut off the physical lives of mankind through a death process, to take them into the astral realms of higher teachings and a purging away of the dross of the dense selfishness and materialism resulting from the physical existence just concluded. Then arrange rebirth in the physical plane with the loss of memory regarding prior experience of life's stream. Now, once the decision was made and taken, it remained to decide how the necessary additional individuating force could be applied to mankind. And because of the part which the fallen astral entities had played in the temptation of man, it was decided that a portion of each of the ones who had engineered the debauchery would be removed from them and then distributed among all the human beings in portions which were just sufficient to allow each human entity to hold itself together as an independent unit. Now, although this distribution did succeed in bolstering the self-picture of humans to the necessary degree, it also had a negative effect by incorporating into each human being a small part of one of the fallen beings. There was planted in each human a seed of negativity that could, unless purified and cleansed, lead to a downward spiral for that human entity. Now, can you begin to relate to the inbred balance of the fallen energies as to the quantity of presence? The plan was explained fully to the human group before it was implemented, and all human entities agreed. And it was promised that in order to compensate for the addition of the negative seeds to mankind, other members of the astral group, ones that had not taken part in the crossbreeding, would act as guides and guardians for human beings up until the end of the specified reincarnational arrangement. Now, once being this cycle of experiences would be somewhat locked into that cycle of entire cycling upon a single planet. It is only recently, so to speak, that ones of you who have passed on into the higher evolved dimensions of ethereal progression have volunteered to return to this cycle of experience to bring transition to the human life forms. Enter the Dark Brotherhood. Now, among the astral beings whose vibrations were particularly low were several that could not be fragmented in the manner just described. They were the main instigators of the debauchery and the evil teachings that were conveyed to mankind and for the part they played. The karmic burden was very heavy. These beings were allowed to serve the advancement of the human race in another way, by directing a brotherhood whose duty would be to try again and again to tempt man away from purity and spiritual advancement. Now, the function of these entities would be to draw the weaker specimens off the path, so that those who remained strong could constitute a group of uniformly dedicated entities who had passed through the test of selfishness, materialism, and had, quote, won. The brotherhood formed is that which we now call the Dark Brotherhood, DB. Now, although the worst of the fallen astral beings did not contribute fragments to the individuating of the human race, there were others whose vibrations were also extremely low, and who did contribute. There was then a problem as to how to decide which of the human group would receive these particularly dark fragments. It was realized that any who allowed such darkness into themselves ran a greater risk of failure because of the darkness within. Therefore, it was decided that those who volunteered to accept these dark fragments would be helped in two ways. One, they would also receive a fragment from one of the astral beings who had not fallen and who had remained pure. And two, they would be given special help throughout their series of incarnations. I hope I am not taking away all your fun and mystery. There are still human beings on Earth right now who were these special volunteers. Recognize anyone? They're generally those who appear to have more essence or spirit than others. Often they are responsible for the greatest good, but also for the greatest evil. Now, some among them lost the battle which they had assumed and became the worst of men, and others succeeded and became the best. The Black Brotherhood, BB, drew its members mainly from the astral entities who had fallen. But some of them are souls who were originally human, who had received the powerful dark fragments along with the light, and who had allowed the temptations of flesh existence, materialism, and selfishness to draw them into the downward spiral, which could only be halted at death of the human physical body, followed by recleansing on the astral planes of learning. They carried enough unified essence as a result of the extra contributions to remain individualized even in the very difficult vibrations where the Dark Brotherhood brothers are confined. An environment in which most human souls could not be sustained. And I will speak of the confinement of the Dark Brotherhood brothers next. Where are they? In the astral realms are found many regions which are distinct one from the other. Now some overflow with light and warmth of spiritual wisdom. Others are completely permeated by darkness and despair, along with hatred and desire for revenge. The latter regions are relatively small and are locations where the basest and coarsest souls and entities are either drawn or specifically confined. Bad news, human brothers. The darker levels are akin to the earth plane in vibration. And because of this vibrational similarity, the influence of the dark inhabitants upon those in incarnation on earth is particularly strong. For example, many souls who died after life of addiction to drugs, drunkenness, and debauchery are attracted to the lowest of the astral areas, and from there can influence and, in a sense, obsess those who are still in the alive physical format. Now, their victims are only those who suffer from the same weaknesses and who frequent bars, brothels, and other locations of coarseness and debauch. And you once thought it was in your genes. Oops, genes. Sick. The discarnate souls attach themselves to their victims from the astral side and are enabled to participate vicariously in the old habits by urging these unfortunates to indulge, as they also had once done. Beyond a given point, you can be completely possessed and therefore forfeit any control over yourselves. Do you see perhaps why we plead, preach, and insist on moderation in all activities and intake? You can become a helpless pawn in the clutches of the satanic demons in drunkenness, etc. You will be struck harder if you are what we call a worker and an etheric being involved in this transition circumstance. How better to get you? And they will cause you to take actions which will ensure your human counterparts, police, and injustice system to take you out or cause you to take yourself out through suicide or accident. The path of progress. Now I should note here, however, that these dark souls who are in the lowest and darkest astral levels are not confined permanently to those levels. If at any time they are able to raise their vibrations and spiritual insight high enough to gain access to the lighter and warmer levels, then they are welcomed into those levels. Now, do you think that might be one heck of an accomplishment? And some of you ones should remember very well. This process is not automatic. The darkened soul of the low vibration literally could not gain access to the higher astral realms, while he remains only at a base vibration. And to place him in such a high frequency would cause him great pain and suffering due to the mismatch between his basic nature and that of the higher astral realm. Therefore, he would immediately return to the darker abodes where the pain is less. And it is only by raising one's vibrations to match those at the higher astral levels that any soul can gain access to them. Now I am reminding you, dear ones, that it is similar to yourselves trying to get up a beam of a beam ship and into etheric presence. It also entails us lowering our vibrations unto your boundaries. A hard job on either part and most uncomfortable for both parties involved. But now let's go back to the DBBs, for there is an important difference. Now the entities in that brotherhood are able to shield themselves from the pain of existing in a field of light and love. So because of certain mental techniques which are known to them, again, Satan is a master teacher. This technique allows them to have access to all of the astral realms as well as to the physical plane. Ahoy! And uh-oh, if there was not some law restraining their movements. Well, relief, there is such a law. It had to be decreed because of the vulnerable human souls on Earth plane and those sojourning between lives on the astral. And in the case of these dark entities, a superior force was brought into play which normally does not permit their free movement, but which can be suspended under certain circumstances. Now this force fully restrains all of the dark brothers and is such that they cannot annul it. For you impatient ones, I will get there. DBBs to test and weed. Now we have spoken of the suspension of the restraining force under particular circumstances, and we now will explain further. Previously in this journal, I spoke of the important function of the DBBs toward the human race, namely to test and weed out poor specimens, those without the resolve and insight to allow themselves to advance to higher spiritual realms by increasing their vibrational frequencies. I emphasize that at the time of the setting of the DB, human beings were by no means all equal in characteristics. Some had developed great wisdom and insight through the efforts put forth in the long experience since their beginning on Earth, and others had never bothered to investigate the purpose and the goal of their sojourn in the material plane and were possessed of very little insight or discrimination. The function of the dark ones was and is to facilitate the division between those wishing and able to advance and those who have doomed themselves to failure. It is very little different in perception, however, it is greatly different. You can no longer drift about in ignorance of journey intent, for the play is ending. For most of the players in the cast, it is very little different in perception, however, it is greatly different. And you can no longer drift about in ignorance of your journey intent, for the play is ending for most of the players in the cast. It is time to get on with deciding which play you want to go with. Don't shove forth that old just be and it will be all right. No, brothers and sisters, it will not be all right. It is time for the choosing up team players only in this game. You choose your team, not the usual way it's done, with the captains of the team choosing. They, however, allow to court and tempt you any way they can through mental manipulation and human weakness. But both teams want strength, so you, who are so mamby-pamby you can't even decide what you will do today, aren't either desired particularly or weeded away. You're the ones who end up last in the selection and usually end up the loser. Now, your New Agers who contribute more damage by being in the way of progress than any other contribution. You do not hinder the dark brothers, for you act as obstacles in the path of light. But they don't particularly want you either, for they know they already have you through weakness and ignorance. You have already drifted your way into what you would identify as your own enemy's camp, while you are showing the world how wondrously pure you are. Now, Satan gets a lot of kicks and laughs at your expense, for you will continue to be right on into his eternity. In order to allow the DBBs to carry out their function, it is necessary to allow members under certain conditions to gain access to other planes and regions that are normally denied to them. The permission, however, must be properly requested and then granted. The matter is never solely up to the DBBs themselves. When the DB asks to be allowed into a given plane, it must present its reasons, and it must offer something in return to the White Brotherhood, which is a broad term defining the spiritual hierarchy of this planet. For example, we at this level are part of the White Brotherhood. And generally, any specific requests coming from the DB which involves actions or access normally not allowed them must be accompanied by an offer of equivalent advantage for the White Brotherhood. Parenthesis, like, what will you give us, WB, if we leave Dharma alone? Well, you can easily see we have not made that particular bargain as of yet. Dharma tested. As these offers and counteroffers are made, they're made before the mighty council and or cosmic council of the spiritual hierarchy, which may or may not give its assent to the exchange. The final decision is made at a very high plane, effectively beyond the level of any commitment to one side or another. To be specific with an example, there was a point during the early development of this receiver, like the day before yesterday. No, I jest, for it was just a week or so ago, when a spokesman of the DB proposed that they be given access to the receiver for a period of time so they could attempt to move her away from her appointed task. The plan was submitted for a decision and the effort allowed. We had no particular fear of her moving away from us. We keep her too busy to notice anything else, and besides, we hit her with Simon Peter periodically to keep her humble. So they were granted the ability to tamper with the substance of the information, not the substance of the human receiver, except as they could conceive her, she was too ill or too weary, etc. At first, Dharma had some confusion, for I was also plugging in my circuits, and it was and still is a miserable time. Always you hit the receiver at a time of confusion and change over to less familiar energy frequencies. Aha! Now the punchline, and don't one of you ever forget it. Never, never, never. It had been agreed that in answer to a direct question, the Dark Brothers would be required to admit to their identity. And this occurred, and Dharma won the round. Hatton had trained her well, brothers. Be most grateful. Now, what did we gain? We gained the ability to tell you ones this information that you can combat their attempts to dissuade you from your mission. And Dharma went blindly along with her clearing, and although it remains unpleasant for her, she has sustained a level of receiving which is unsurpassed. And I salute her for this marvelous strength. You ones in this little group have had a most painful time of sequence hereabouts. So be it. Let us have a break to renew a bit. In the light, I withdraw to stand by. ASHTAR out. Chapter 8, Recording 3, ASHTAR, Tuesday, September 5th, 1989. 2:45 a.m., Year 3, Day 20. ASHTAR to continue. The bad seed provides DBB's entree. Now, widespread is the influence which the DBBs have upon average individuals. It reaches from the depths of the depravity which is found in drinking and drug dens and brothels, all the way to the boardrooms of large corporations and the very highest levels of government. In fact, the more degraded and higher the probable influence, the harder and meaner the impact. It becomes totally integrated so that all facets play into the whole. In essence, what the DBBs are able to do is to bring to life the embers which were taken into each human being at that time when the gift of permanence was conveyed. This I have already covered, because the gift entail adding to each human entity part of the essence of the one of the fallen beings. These same beings now of the DB are readily able to tune themselves to the vibrations of any human soul frequency that has allowed itself to be colored strongly by the negative qualities of the seed, which was taken in at that formative birthing. Now, through this attunement between human being and a DB, a magnification of the effect of that negative seed can take place. This is the origin of the concept that just as each human soul had its guardian angel, so too it has its own demon or fallen angel and or bad seed. And we should know that. Angel, devil. Who's whispering the loudest? Let's get back to the reading. Strictly speaking, this is not true, since the essence of a given one of the fallen beings is distributed among a large number of humans. The notion that a given human soul is very susceptible to the influence of one particularly evil entity, then the notion that a given human soul is more susceptible to the influence of one particular evil entity than of others is in general true, for the reason that I have now differentiated. When the plan to distribute fragments of the fallen beings among humans was adopted, it was expected that the human entities would strive to purify and cleanse the dark seeds that were then implanted. Many have indeed accomplished this purification, and such individuals are far less susceptible to the whisperings of the DBBs than are their fellows who have never attempted to eradicate the darkness within. An attempt to spur the human soul toward a particular action or thought which leads away from soul advancement and which followed far enough would lock that human being into a downward spiral from which it could not escape is attempted. Violence, aggression, war, the Martian influence. I will now discuss violence, aggression, and loss of temper. In its ultimate manifestation, this category of influence brings war on a massive scale. It is not an inherent part of the human makeup as originally created. To feel the hostility and hatred that are now seen so often in the world, these feelings have been introduced due to the combined effect of the dark seeds taken in at the time of the gift of permanence, together with the influence of the planet which man calls Mars. The red planet harbors an immense thought form of hatred and aggression which can strongly overshadow thoughts and events on the earth whenever it comes to a close approach. Now, these factors, spurred by the constant efforts of the DB to fan the flames of bitterness and hostility between men, have been sufficient to allow warfare and violence on an unprecedented scale to sweep over this earth. In some of your earth countries, notably Iraq and Iran, the hostile attitude has put its foul roots down into the very heart of the nation, darkening almost every citizen its poison. There is little hope that the bloodshed and horror can be stopped in countries such as these. In actuality, some such countries will completely consume themselves, and it will not be until the final death throes of the evil world system that those fortunate lands will perceive the wrongness of their practices. And by that time, however, it will most likely be too late to avoid destruction. Temptation. Now, let us speak of temptation. This relates specifically to the idea of self. And while it was always intended that humanity should develop a strong and stable image of the self, there was never any intention that such development could lead to a permanent coldness between humans. Nor was there the aim to allow the selfishness, now rampant on earth, to permit one soul to control or manipulate others for purely personal reasons. Pride, haughtiness, and any manifestations of selfishness have developed only since men learned to think of themselves as better than others, more deserving, more powerful, or whatever towards power growth of self. Now you put the characteristics into subliminal tapes and drizzle them into the subconscious to ensure they are nurtured. Well, these attitudes poison relationships between souls and lead to permanent estrangement, producing a coldness, a distance which can last over many lives in the joint experiences of souls who have allowed this to occur. Materialism, possessions, and atheism. Now, another big one, materialism. This is a very broad topic, but can basically be summed up under two headings: possessions and atheism. The lust for material possessions has been aided and abetted by the rich lifestyle of the 20th century, having and living at least for countries in the West. However, in the so-called have-not, third world lands, there's a great desire for material possessions among those who have been exposed to the kinds of goods which are available in other places. Now, this arises because in most instances, the souls who are born into the have-not countries are there because, among other reasons, they must learn not to covet material things for their own sake. Now, when these individuals again see the kinds of goods that might be available, they rekindle the old covetousness streak which they have brought over from a previous life incarnate. And they can suffer because their desire to possess these things cannot be fulfilled. The idea that atheism is related to materialism may seem strange to some, but perhaps I can point out that the surest way to lose sight of the higher realities is to fasten one's attention unto the things of the earth to such an extent that one forgets the truth that the material plane is only one realm of experience. Now compound that with the concept that perhaps there's another plane of existence, and you have total materialism. And if that goes further into belief that earth life is but a passing phase, lived on a plane which is not really the home of the human race, or that it is all there is, you have no reason not to respond to the total material persona. Now, if the mind becomes too obsessed with things and possessions, there's a great likelihood that the truths of the spirit will be passed over and forgotten. And for many souls, this is precisely what has happened. So your question should be at this point, how does one combat these categories of temptation? The answer is too simple to be adequately utilized. Love! It is love alone that can surmount the barriers of distrust and hatred which man has thrown up due to his violent and aggressive ways. I do not refer to anything in your vocabulary that is defined as love, nor of hardly any of your physical human activities, which, by the way, are almost totally satanic in origin and fulfillment. The solution. It is love which allows one to perceive that selfishness and the manipulation of others are not noble or spiritual paths to follow. It is love alone which can displace the lust for possessions in the mind of one who is caught in that dreadful trap. Only love can broaden the understanding to the point where the soul can see that the purpose of life is not to collect, but rather to give, not to hinder, but rather to help others, and not to aggrandize the self, but to place it into the service of the creative forces that have made this realm of earth, man, and all the myriads of creatures which inhabit its many planes and sub-realms. The creation. Now, brothers, let us investigate how those traps are set for you. Getting at those on the path. There are numerous souls who instinctively know that there is a path somewhere, a route, which, if followed diligently, will allow them to achieve spiritual progress and a true grasp of the meaning and purpose of life. However, these souls are not all of the same discernment. Now, many are very young in the sense of experience. Let me use an example which is a favorite one of the Kohans. Hilarion hypothesized that a soul has had numerous lives of a rather common variety, living within the various traditions into which it has been birthed, adopting the bias of the environs, including all of its prejudices and narrow thought patterns, never stimulating fully the realization that life has a purpose entirely incongruous to that. Now, which conventional wisdom maintains? Then suppose that soul lives a recent life in which its experience is touched deeply by another person, someone who had this special awareness of the higher truths, someone who demonstrated the beauty and love which could be expressed by one who is on the path of spiritual advancement. In some cases, though not all, the soul who had previously been following a conventional series of lives might suddenly become stimulated to struggle more diligently, to climb out of that ordinary mold, to gain a far deeper understanding of the meaning of existence. So the soul is then born into the current life pattern. Because of that previous contact with the spiritually advanced person, the soul is born with an intent. It watches and it keeps looking around, seeking for something it cannot consciously identify. It feels that something must be just around the corner, some clue which will give it to the understanding it knows it lacks, the grasp of meaning which is not present. Then something will happen that will introduce the soul to a different way of living or thinking. Some teacher takes the soul into this circle of influence, and some book seems to contain the signpost for which the seeking was probing, and a circumstance is presented, which can alter the pathway. Here, however, is the test of discernment, of the inner recognition of truth. For there are many false teachers upon the earth in present day, many so-called gurus and sages who hold out a certain philosophy of living and acting. Now, these may attract the new seeker for a time, but if the teachings are not fully in tune with the higher truths, or if the teacher himself does not behave in accordance with the philosophy that he proclaims, and brothers, this is a big one, then the seeker is expected to see the dichotomy and to become aware that perhaps this mode of thought is only a halfway house of some sort, a way station on the path to better and higher wisdom. Now, many souls do not recognize the trap into which they have fallen. They embrace the teachings, join the movement, and become devotees of their supposed masters. They embrace the teachings, join the movement, and become devotees of their supposed master, defending him against all attack by those who have become delusioned, often cutting themselves off from family and former friends, never realizing that any moment that produces division, coldness, and estrangement between human beings, even though it does not openly espouse these attitudes, must be impaired in some way. And there are thousands of such movements now on earth which fall into this category. Of course, there's always have been the regular ones around also, those whose man-made doctrines have obscured the true original teaching. And because of the cosmic law governing the operation of these testing factors, we are not permitted to go about naming such groups, teachers, or movements, nor do I have any desire to do so. However, I can and will list the kinds of teaching and activity which identify such forces, and the reader can form his own conclusion as he examines the various movements which are now on earth, which you will find are almost all of them. I would wish to place in capitals and underline these items, but will trust you to pay attention. Now, the most obvious traps are set by the movements which claim to be spiritual, but which are headed by individuals whose personal lifestyle is clearly the opposite of the teachings that are held forth. An example is a self-proclaimed guru or teacher who sends the new converts out into the streets selling flowers or whatever to raise money, and who then pockets a large portion of the proceeds of these sales. Even if the teachings of the movement are in the direction of spirituality, the seeker is expected to be able to discriminate, to take only that which is in accord with his own inner feeling of the truth for himself, and to reject that which is not in accord. And most of the so-called gurus who fall into this category are counting on the inability of the new convert to discriminate. They expect the convert to swallow everything about the movement on the grounds that some of the teachings are in accordance with the cosmic truths of love and light. These ones will most often broadcast the term love, an intimate relationship of spiritual integration, etc., ad nauseum. As an example, a body of teaching may include an insistence that love between mankind is the only hope for the salvation of the race, or it may refer to the functions of the guides and teachers on other planes, or it may stress the need to subjugate the self and undertake service to others. But each of these teachings can be perverted to an unworthy cause. For further example, the love between souls may be used to require the neophyte to love the guru or teacher unconditionally, or to give all his possessions to the movement to demonstrate his love. Or again, the reference to guides on other planes may be used to convince the new seeker that the body of teaching provided by the movement must be corrected, because it comes through direct revelation from such guides. Finally, the subjugation of the self can be carried to the point where total self-abnegation is required, so that the neophyte will be willing to work any number of hours a day to raise money for the movement, to in turn be utilized freely by the leader. Seen through shams. The soul caught in such movements is not left without guideposts. He is not abandoned by his own guides, who are anxious to move him on to a broader perspective of reality. And this can only happen when he sees the sham of the movement, which has entrapped him. And this perception can come if the seeker watches the signs and clues which come his way. And the easiest way to discern the truth of any movement is to study its leader or founder. If the leader or founder is living richly off the sweat of the converts, then he is a false guru. That is the most obvious means to detect fraud of this kind. But for those who understand the cosmic laws, there are other ways. For example, there is a law that any individual on the earth plane must show on his physical form some sign or characteristic which identifies his true essence. The law is in conformity with the assertion that those who have eyes to see and ears to hear can always find the truth by direct observation. Look at the face of the leader. Look at his bodily structure. Does he have a serene, happy countenance? Or is there something sinister about him? Is he grossly overweight? I mean, to the point of obvious self-indulgence. Or is he crippled in some manner? Sometimes the crippling is the overweight itself. Now, don't go off on the deep end. I speak of grossness. Or is that one maintained so perfectly in body form as to be obsessed with his appearance and vanity? Does his appearance give you any reason to doubt that he is the only best interest of the race at heart? There are other areas to study as well. Has a leader ever been hounded through the courts or banned from any country? Have any of the followers ever developed mental aberrations or schizophrenic traits as a result of their exposure to the movement? Do the spokesmen for the group want you, first and foremost, to give an appreciable sum of money or to take some expensive course as an introduction to the teachings? I speak here of personal gain for the leadership itself, of benefit only to a few top people. And does the movement offer mainly success in the physical world, money, business, love, and power, rather than deepening of the understanding or spiritual wisdom? I stress that the seeker is always given ample clues to the true nature of an individual or movement. He need merely open his eyes and read the signals directly. They never lie. Always good to look at what a leader might end up in court about. Remember, Emmanuel was harassed quite notably by a court of justice. But don't miss the point. As we deal with the groups and the movements which are intended to trap the unwary seeker, let us not miss the point. Most of these things are aided, abetted, and encouraged by the energies of the DBBs, which are not to say that the leaders or main instigators are themselves mere puppets of the Dark Ones. In some cases, this is true, but in the majority of such movements, the DB merely spurs on the innate negativity and greedy ego of the leader, prompting him to seek wealth through the movement or control over others or fame, just to stand out in wondrous holy garb and espouse pearls of wisdom. His. Vatican comes to my mind. Did I say that? As to the souls who become entrapped by the movement, they too are influenced wherever possible by the DBBs who are attempting to keep them locked up in a movement where they will not be able to use their enthusiasm and energy in reaching directly out to their brothers living so-called normal lives. The idea is to trap the unwary seekers in a vortex, to take them out of the mainstream, and in many cases to bring about estrangement between the seeker and members of his own family, so that the energies of the seeker will be tied up in emotional struggle, and thus be unable to help his brothers. And there is, however, an additional phase to the efforts of the DB to deter the advancement of the race through side-tracking seekers. They know that those who are impelled to find a spiritual path through life are the best hope of the world, for these souls have the possibility of reaching many, many other souls through their words and their deeds. And because such souls are so pivotal to the salvation of mankind, the DB desires above all else to cause them difficulty, to sidetrack their energies, and to sow confusion and contention between them. Do any of these things hit any nails upon their heads? Well, in terms of causing the seeker difficulty in his life pattern, the DBBs are permitted to insist that certain karmic burdens which such souls carry be discharged at a time convenient to the DB. In most cases, the petitions by the Dark Ones are granted, and the karma is allowed to fall upon the seeker. Now, the exceptions are made when the seeker is at a sensitive phase of his quest and has placed himself in a position from where he could accomplish much, which would lead others to seek a higher way through life. And aside from these exceptions, as we say, most such requests are allowed. And this is why certain souls who are clearly aware of higher truth will from time to time be visited by misfortune that does not seem to be tied directly with lesson learning and which is not even indicated by the planetary positions. I have already dealt with the question of sidetracking the energies of the seeker and have explained that most of this accomplished through the various movements now on the earth and which act as backwaters into which the seeker can be trapped. Sowing, confusion, and dissension. Finally, there is a question of the attempts by the DBBs to sow confusion and dissension between seekers and or workers. And this is accomplished primarily through the telepathically or physically transmitted material which has found its way into books. Naturally, we too realize that our writings must be scrutinized in the light of the comments we are about to make and have made, but we have no doubt that the careful seekers will be able to make their own determination as to which source they feel is more correct for them. And there are certain specific kinds of teachings which are precisely calculated to confuse the unwary. So to explain the most important of these, we must first point out what many seekers already well know, that the person and the mission of the individual who is called the Christ should be regarded as the very summit of revealed truth for mankind thus far. Christ's teachings showed the way. Because of certain of his teachings, indeed the simplest of the teachings, he represents a different frontal attack upon the DB, and all which have attempted to accomplish in the millennia since the rebirth scheme was initiated, specifically by asserting that one should love one's enemies. Christ presented the single most effective way to overcome the temptations of earth life and to confound the whisperings of the DB by looking on one's enemies, or better, on all creation with pure love in one's heart. All the negative emotions, all the enmities and frustrations of life simply fade away. Without these annoying factors, the DBBs cannot succeed in their declared aim of dragging human souls down to destruction. The DB knows full well that the Christ teachings in this regard are the single most effective means for gaining higher ground spiritually, and therefore they seek in any way possible to undermine the reality of the figure of Christ and the validity of this message. This they do in two ways. The first is to cast doubt upon whether or not he ever lived on earth alone. This they do in two ways. The first is to cast doubt upon whether or not he ever lived on the earth plane. There are certain so-called messages from other planes which contend that he was a reality on a certain plane, but not on the physical. Now, anyone who can understand that all creation is one can surely perceive that if Christ was a reality on one plane, he must have manifested on all planes. To do otherwise would detract from the completeness of the message which his life represented. And other transmissions contend that he was merely a man and that there was nothing special about him aside from the wisdom which he had attained through revelation or study. Again, this is intended to undermine the importance of his life and to sow doubt as to whether he represented some special factor which had entered the earth realm to live and walk with mankind. Well, he was merely a man who was greater than all men, but he taught that any man could reach his stature and wisdom. In short, any contention that Christ was less than a manifested special being whose life was dedicated to the spiritual upliftment of the human race and who was ever lighted during the ministry years by the pure glory of the Father Creator must be carefully scrutinized to see whether or not there is a deliberate attempt to detract from the importance of the Christian message. And I speak of the Christian message in full truth of definition, not what it has become in your eons of misinterpretation. And other supposed teachings from other planes are also directed to undermining the certainty and the understanding of the seeker. For example, some sources contend that the passage of time is an illusion, that all lives are lived simultaneously, and that there is no real distinction between past, present, and future. Now, in a certain sense, which can only be understood from a vantage point which is outside of the physical plane, this contention is true. However, the result of trying to fully grasp this philosophical notion from within physical incarnation can only be total confusion. And what you perceive is time allotments, and that is exactly what you get. The consciousness of man has been given to him in order to allow him to perceive time as a flow, so that he could understand the great law of cause and effect. Man does A, and the result is Z. Now, this always takes place in that order and is intended to allow perception of the truth that man, by virtue of the thoughts and emotion he harbors, makes his own reality. If this latter idea can be grasped, then the even higher purpose can be served, namely to allow each incarnate soul to understand itself. Now, the DBBs do not want man to understand all of the ramifications of what we will call karmic law, and they attack the possibility of such a grasp by trying to confuse the seeker with regard to time. If one concludes that the flow of time is an illusion, then that all lives are lived simultaneously, then how can existence from one life possibly affect another? But karma does pass from life to life. Karma is another of your misused words, which has lost most of its true definition, but I find no other suitable. At the level where there are manifested results of these experiences, it is quite correct and certainly adequate to consider that one life precedes another in an orderly fashion and sequence. The reconciliation of the earth-based point of view with the higher grasp of time as a single instant, which is pulled out into stream by man's consciousness, must wait until the seeker has reached the spiritual plane from which these ideas can be seen in their full light. Misleading teachings. Now, for one other example of misleading teachings, there are sources which contend that the galactic observers now in the region of the earth are not all friendly to mankind. There is a suggestion that some are distinctly alien and even hostile, and that certain of these beings kidnap humans and kill humans and animal life for experimental purposes. It is difficult for us to present a line of argument which will fully set aside the fears that such messages engender, but I will most surely attempt to do so. Firstly, it is true that not all of the civilizations in this galaxy are highly evolved in a technical and spiritual sense. Some are comparable to Earth civilization, which presently are at the very bottom of the scale due to the self-annihilation which mankind practices through war, violence, and murder. However, the present phase of evolution of the galactic entity itself is such that only those civilizations which have attained a state of awareness of the cosmic laws and who have overcome the base passions which lead to war, tyranny, and self-annihilation are allowed to develop the technical means which are necessary to permit them to move to other parts of the galaxy. Now, the ones who remain imprisoned in their own negativity and violence must also remain prisoners of their own planets, just as do you ones. Hence, the other uninvolved civilizations in this galaxy are also confined to their own local region of space, because they're not allowed to develop the technological means for escaping. In the case of man, the minor successes in terms of reaching the moon are the maximum which can be achieved using current technology. No space entity would defy the cosmic laws to go further. But that does not mean that attempts have not been made to extract information from ones who fall into your clutches. It does mean, however, that you have more allies in place on your planet than you had supposed at first glance. The secret of free energy, as you commonly recognize energy, will not fall into the man's hands as long as he threatens to pollute the rest of space with his hatred and his uncontrolled passion. It thus follows that most civilizations that are able to make the journey to this part of the galaxy must be of an evolved nature, and this is true. If they were not, then with their vastly superior technology, they could easily decimate this planet, kill all life, or set themselves up in an absolute dictators. But you do a good enough job of all those categories to not need assistance. No force known to humanity could stop them. But they are stopped by their own spiritual development. The galactic observers would never dream of attempting to interfere with man's path on this planet. That law is overruled only when a planetary civilization has descended so far into self-destruction, as man has done, that it threatens not only to destroy itself, but to poison or damage other regions of space in the bargain, not to mention destruction in his only life source, Mother Planet. Nuclear war could damage fabric of space. Because man has been allowed to develop nuclear energy, there is a serious danger that during the coming nuclear war, and there will be one, the explosions could actually damage the fabric of space itself. And it is for this reason that the observers and participants are here in such numbers and remain on constant alert. Otherwise, we would wait until the allotted timing and do the Armageddon thing and get it all over with. We have a duty to the galactic being, namely to preserve it from damage committed knowingly or unknowingly by humanity as it unleashes centuries of hatred and violence upon itself in the last death throes upon the Earth planet. At the same time, we understand that we must be prepared to step in and rescue the noblest fraction of the race from the Holocaust which man's unevolved passions will unleash. And without the possibility of such a rescue, there is danger that man really could accomplish the complete annihilation of himself and all other life forms on the planet. The aforementioned instances of misleading and confusing information will suffice to illustrate the efforts exerted by the DBB to detour the seekers from their path. Only one further area remains to be discussed, and that relates to the direct attempts to physically interfere with the projects the seekers undertake in the service of their brothers. Dharma, I realize you grow very fatigued, and I will close when you make a decision to do so. I do not have much more for this session, so I will leave it in your determination. Perhaps we could slow a bit and be able to finish. Direct intervention, very costly. I emphasize, first of all, that direct access to the physical plane of manifestation is extremely limited to the DBBs, and is for the other more positive brotherhoods as well. The law in this regard is that both they and we must primarily work through those who are in carnation. Hence, the good that can be done in the world must ultimately depend on the willingness of the incarnated individuals to put their time and energy into the endeavor. Likewise, the evil that manifests on earth plane must do so through the agency of those bodies who are prepared to do the work of the DBBs. If all who are tuned to darkness should cease to inhabit physical bodies, the evil afflicting the earth would disappear, because there would be no more instruments through which the DBBs could accomplish their aims. The rule that governs direct influence in the plane of matter is simply to state the energy required to accomplish a given interference within the three-dimensional second density material plane is directly proportional to the amount of good or evil which that interference can accomplish. For example, if a given interference is directed to producing a clearly negative action, like a murder, the energy required from the DBBs to accomplish it directly, parenthesis, without one of their disciples being utilized, is enormous. And usually, unless they considered such an act indispensable to their cause, they would not be prepared to lose that amount of energy. Besides, it is not so difficult to find fanatics who will say, plant a bomb aboard an airline. Now, on the other side, the force required to, say, cause a fire, to suddenly emit a shower of sparks, for example, in order to jolt or frighten those sitting around it, is not nearly so great. The main point which must be understood here is that they and we are under the law of economy of energy, so to speak. Now, this means that neither we nor they have access to limitless amounts of energy with which to seek our respective goals. If only one side were restricted in this way and the other had access to as much energy as it required, then the battle would not be balanced. If both sides were given all of the energy they wanted to use, the earth plane would turn into an arena in which discarnate forces battled ad infinitum, leaving no room for man to pursue his spiritual pilgrimage or anything else. Hence, the only workable scheme is to limit both sides equally. So now, some things to look out for. The DBBs utilize the creation of robot-like entities at the etheric level, programmed to directly interfere with reality. For example, if the DB wishes to delay the publication of a book, they could send such entities to the location where the actual printing is to take place, after programming them to cause breakdowns and mistakes during the printing process. Mostly, they will utilize thought pattern input to cause one's performing tasks to cause disruption or breakdowns. You may run into that very thing with these publications, for the press prints some very low vibrational material. In order to create robots of the kind mentioned, the DBBs must actually donate a part of their own essence. When the job is completed, the essences are reabsorbed back into those who donated them. However, if the material going to create the robots should be destroyed by means known to certain seekers before reabsorption can take place, then the recombining cannot occur and the contributing DBBs permanently lose the respective parts that sustained the destroyed etheric robots. Whew. I trust you understand that etheric means invisible to the human consciousness. You can destroy the gremlin. The technique for destroying such etheric entities is to command them, in the name of Jesus Christ, to disappear and to cease to exist. In the name of Emmanuel, Christ, or Sananda, or Creator, or, is quite as sufficient. It is that for so long now, the term Jesus has been accepted that the name is most distasteful to the DBBs. And it is further not sufficient to order them simply to depart, as that does not entail disintegration of the entity, only departure. This is where you get the saying, there are gremlins in the machinery, if a machine keeps breaking down. There are also good little fairies, so I do not wish to be lopsided. However, gremlins serve a very definite purpose, and brothers, those particular entities are originated on the dark side. The DBBs can also manipulate many of the currents and the elementary forces which are most attuned to them in vibration. For example, although the element fire is a great purifying power on earth plane, it is also attuned to the notion of karma, trial by fire, and the destruction of that which is consumed, especially when the fire is burning coal, parentheses, coming from the darkness beneath the surface of the earth. The DBBs are enabled to manipulate to their own ends. We should emphasize that such use of fire cannot be allowed to be kept outside of that called for in karmic aspect, but the karmic burden of the race as a whole is still so great that the DB has great latitude. They may wish to use this elemental force. Another process at work in relation to fire is the manner in which human beings provide the energies which manifest in many of the fires which destroy property. Fire is the phenomenon which most closely corresponds to rage and anger. Now, these connections of fire with anger are no accident. When any two persons indulge in a fierce argument, with much shouting and anger, but without giving full vent to the anger in a physical way, there is created that at the etheric level, a seething cloud of fire-like energy which seeks expression on the earth plane. And if it cannot find expression in violence between the two persons who created it, then it will give the right circumstances, release itself in a destructive fire. Of course, some sparks must be present to allow the fire to begin. But once it is initiated, its full fury will manifest. If that type of energy is stored within, make sure you cleanse it with spiritual water, brothers. Possession. Finally, the DBBs are able to literally take over certain persons for brief or prolonged periods of time, and through them carry out specific actions. Now, this can happen to those who are normally at a spiritual nature, if such persons upon themselves up to the dark forces. Now, most opening up comes through overindulgence in alcohol, for it is the one most abused altering substance. When one takes alcohol into the system in any form, an access opens at the back of the head through which the dark forces, if they put enough effort into it, can gain access. Let me assure you that in this group, any effort is not too much. Much can be accomplished in a short time by one properly placed, and the DBBs will normally only undertake this procedure if it promises to yield rich dividends for them. In the instance of a couple, often years are lost to light service because one or the other of the pair are kept in an addition for that specific reason. Again, you must command the energy to withdraw and depart in the name of the Christ. It will go for it, is obligated to do so. It does not mean it will go willingly, without a struggle, or instantly. However, if attended diligently, it will depart every time. Although I have set forth the main techniques by which the DBBs seek to influence humans in incarnation, I must point out that there are many instances which do not fall into the categories I have described. In every case, however, the seeker or worker whose intuition is open is alert and asks for proper guidance will be able to decide for himself when the DBBs are behind any particular manifestation on the earth plane. They are, remember, required to wear a clue. Dharma, let us close for today, for if we set the stress on the wrist muscles too intently, we will be delayed on the morrow. There is too much material to finish easily at this sitting. I am most indebted to you for your willing service, and I shall not mention Simon Peter again this day. So be it, and salut. I am ASHTAR, to stand by. Out.